Thank you so much. I thought I was the absent-minded professor, so we're going to have to duke that out. In the year 2000, I was living in Cairo, and I had joined the American University there, the American University in Cairo. I lived with my husband and our young daughter, and one day I was sitting in the beautiful courtyard of the Greek campus. There I was, enjoying a cup of tea with my colleague Samia. We were engaged in the usual small talk between colleagues, and she had described to me her return to Egypt after living in the United States for maybe 10 years. And she asked me a question, which was, where do I think that I was going to raise my daughter? She had described coming back to Egypt as an important place for her children to find their roots. And the question, I have to say, really took me by shock. Was my daughter going to be raised in Egypt, or was she going to be raised in the United States? And the reason I found this question so troubling was that I myself was uncomfortable or not really very connected with this idea of my own roots. You see, my parents were from, my father was a refugee from Hungary, and my mother was an au pair from Switzerland. And she had the plans to go back to Switzerland, ended up staying in the United States. And so there I was, an awkward mashup kid with no home language to speak of, no real unifying traditions like we often hear about with migrant families going back home and feeling like they have some kind of connection and identity to their home family. So this question of not really fitting into this binary of here and away, or home country or migrant country, I felt that question of straddling that boundary really set me up for a world of awkward questions over the course of my career in forced migration and refugee studies. Because, as you know, the paradigm for forced migration and refugee studies and the whole way that we think about migration is that people come from home countries, and they come from home countries, they migrate, and then maybe they return to their home countries, or they don't. They fit into a new country. These policies of home and away are really an expression of our predisposition, or our current organization, our current political organization, into settled communities. And these settled communities often use migration policy to manage the flow of people. So the policies are not made by the movers, they're made by the settled people. And I think we can recognize that I think we had some earlier speakers that were really talking about how that paradigm puts migrants in an awkward position, because if you can't go back, if you can't fit in, where are you? You're in between, you're out of place. And this paradigm has been more and more challenged by the sheer number of migrants who are living and working and traveling and moving, and not just through one country, but through many countries. Now, so from the point of view of migrants themselves, you see that migrant belonging doesn't necessarily dispose of the identities that people had from their previous lives. And as we see now, more and more migrants are moving not just from one place to another place, but across geographic space. Many forced migrants, for example, will transit in another country, or not think that they're moving, but then have to be displaced again. So there's a lot of connections that migrants and forced refugees make between the different places that they've lived, the places where they have family, the places where they have connections. And so they're really not straddling this binary the way that I think the migration policy expects them to straddle it. They're not fitting in this specific way. So an alternative to thinking about this, it could be explored by giving you two stories of people that I know, one a Sudanese migrant and the other a Hungarian national. Or are they? Are their stories really that simple, or can we find some complexity in their backgrounds? So the first person I'd like to introduce to you is a person with whom I've done a bit of writing and research. Her name is Elsara, and we've worked on the idea of identity in the Sudanese diaspora. So you could say that she's a typical migrant in certain ways. But if you go a little bit further, first of all, she's a band leader of her own musical group called Elsara and the Nubatones, and she's a real badass. I really recommend that you go and listen to her sometime. But through her music, she explores other kinds of heritages that really make the idea of her as a Sudanese migrant more complicated. Her family has long-time roots in Nubia. Her grandmother is from Egypt. She has connections to Sudan for political national pride, and she lives in the United States and specifically in Brooklyn. So these identities really complicate the idea that she has a place to go to that's home and a place that she's come to that she's fitting in. She has connections to all of these different places. But let me introduce you to the second woman in my story. She's called Mariska, and she's a proud Hungarian woman who, even though she did attend graduate school in the United States, she made a conscious choice, like my friend Samia, to return to her national homeland, Hungary, to raise her children so that they would be Hungarian. And you know, on the surface, again, it looks like her identity is relatively straightforward. But if you go back just a couple generations, you find out that her 4 grandparents all represent communities in Hungary that have been erased or absorbed by the nation state over the past 60 or 80 years. And in that case, she does have a connection to people from other places that is masked by her national identity. So this alternative to the binary of belonging that is proclaimed by the nation state system and our migration policy really makes us think that the heritage of movers is really important, right? But so is the movement in our heritage. And if we could somehow find a connection between those two ideas, if we as people could start connecting our web of belonging to places and people and significant parts of the world that make sense to us, I think it could really shape the way that we thought about belonging in 2030 and beyond. So thank you so much.
Thank you.